Welcome back to AP US History, looking at Chapter 25, looking at how the United States got into World War II and how the other parts of the world got involved in World War II. America wants to pursue a course of isolationism. They want to stay out of world affairs. They want to mind their own business. They have this idea that the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean will protect them from threats in Asia and in Europe. But in fact, the world is becoming a smaller place. Because we take no action, it emboldens people like Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan to be aggressive towards their neighbors. So, American isolationism, we were primarily concerned with economic ideas, concerns. We're not going to make any treaties with Europe or in Asia. U.S. Not immediately alarmed by totalitarianism, don't really see the threat that Hitler and Mussolini and Japan pose. There was something called the Nye Committee that was created after World War I in the 1930s that examined how the United States got into World War I. And they're going to come up with some ideas that we should never have been in that war and that we should stay out of future wars. So they're going to investigate that businesses really got us into it. The bankers, the merchants of death, people making arms wanted to make a huge profit and therefore encouraged America to spill blood so that they could sell planes and artillery pieces and bullets. The merchants were called ammunition merchants were called the merchants of death, a derogatory term. The bankers, excuse me, were concerned that they weren't going to get paid back by the Allies, so we needed to jump in and protect our investments. The Nye committees were held from 1934 to 1936. As a result of these committees, we are going to pass some neutrality acts to ensure that we don't get involved in another war. And so they claimed that Wilson had provoked Germany by sailing into the warring nation's waters, and that was true to a large extent. The Germans were trying to keep those supplies from getting to the French and the British. If we had not been sailing our ships in there, they would not have been sunk. But we chose to do so, and therefore they paid the price. So the United States is going to pass some laws, neutrality acts, several of them, to make sure that we don't get involved again. The Neutrality Acts were passed in 1935, 36, and 37. Under these laws, presidents proclaimed the existence of a foreign war. Certain restrictions went into place. One, we could not sell arms to any of the warring nations. We could not provide loans or credits to warring nations. It forbade our American ships from traveling to those nations, getting involved. Non-military goods could be purchased on a cash-and-case basis. So if you were buying wheat or some other kind of food supply or non-military supplies, you had to buy it with cash, not like World War I, where the British and the French owed us billions of dollars and never paid back. It also discouraged the buildup of the Navy and the Army weapons, because if we had those, we probably would use them. The U.S. neutrality, this particular cartoon shows that the Atlantic is getting a lot closer and the war clouds are brewing in Europe. And eventually we will be involved in this war whether we want to or not. The Japanese are going to attack us, and at the same time Hitler and Mussolini are going to declare war on the United States. So much for neutrality. The Ludlow Amendment was proposed in 1938, which simply said that you had to have a national referendum. You had to have the whole country deciding that we needed to go to war instead of just Congress making that decisions. It was passed several times, but never passed through the House and Senate. Now, the path to war with Japan, because they're going to be the first folks that we fight. We placed an embargo on Japan after they invaded French Indochina, which is now present-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Uh, we said that we weren't going to sell them any more steel or oil, which were vital to the Japanese war efforts. They were desperate. Japan was desperate for oil, particularly. Now, Japan has already signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, and they all agreed that if any of them were attacked by the U.S., that the other two would come to their aid. In 1941, December 7th, a date that FDR said would live in infamy in American history, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and destroyed much of the fleet. Fortunately for us, our aircraft carriers were not there, which really are the true capital ships in the future. 3 days later, Germany and Italy, because of their pact with Japan, declare war on the United States. Of course, the British were applauding because they've been in the war since 1939, and they want the United States to help them out. Other things going on. There was a Spanish Civil War going on. Francisco Franco was a fascist leader, and he will take control of Spain. Hitler and Mussolini will aid him. The America stands on the sidelines, as do French and the British, and we will do nothing, and that will fall to another fascist nation, another fascist ruler. Roosevelt issues what he calls the quarantine speech. He condemns the Japanese and Italians for their aggression in other parts of the world. Urged other democracies to quarantine, that is, not do any trading, place an embargo on these countries. He criticized Iceland, who feared that this would lead us to war, but in effect it does. Here's a picture of the American Lincoln Brigade, Americans fighting on the side of those fighting for democracy in Spain, but these forces are going to be defeated by 1939. Certainly, Germany is flexing their muscles at this time. Hitler withdrew from the League of Nations after they were accepted later in 1933. He will flat out reject the Treaty of Versailles. He doesn't believe that the Germans should have to pay reparations. It wasn't their fault. It was everyone's fault. In 1939, he will absorb Austria into the German nation. They will cease to exist as a separate power. The British pursued a policy of appeasement, as did the United States, and that simply is just caving into the demands of tyrants. Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during this time, and he waives an agreement that he makes with Hitler. He says it's somebody you can work with, and then a few months later they are forced to declare war on Germany when they invade Poland. But this appeasement did not work. It just gave them more fuel to the fire that they could exert their will on others in Europe. Britain rejected an idea of an alliance with France and Russia. That didn't seem to work out in World War I, so they didn't think it was going to work out for World War II. They don't want to get involved in another world war because of the tremendous casualties and the costs that happened or occurred during World War I. So appeasement, giving in to an aggressor to preserve peace. Well, when bullies start pushing you around, they're going to continue to bully until you stand up to them, in my opinion. Here is a record of a fascist aggression during this time, and you can see through this that everything seems to be inching closer and closer to war in Europe. The Germans were going to annex Austria. They're going to then annex Czechoslovakia. Hitler and Stalin will sign a non-aggression pact saying they won't fight each other, but then Hitler will go back on this pact later. And then September 1st, 1939, the Germans will attack Poland. Their blitzkrieg. In about a month, Poland is defeated. Now, when Poland is invaded, France and Great Britain will declare war on Germany. And so the fat is in the fire. Um, as far as Czechoslovakia was concerned, there was a minority of Germans living in Czechoslovakia in the Sudetenland, and he wants to absorb that into Germany. At the Munich conference in 1938, this is where Neville Chamberlain goes and talks to him. They gave in to Hitler and said, sure, you can have it as long as this keeps us from going to war. In a few more months, he will take all of Czechoslovakia and absorb it. And then he will turn his attention to Poland, and he will march through them without much effort. Of course, he tells everyone after he's taken Czechoslovakia that he's finished, that that's as far as he wants to go, but he's lying, and now Poland is the next victim. Europeans thought the threat of war was over when they signed this Munich agreement, but not so. And then Germany will invade Poland in 1939 when the Polish government refused to give a Polish corridor that separated Germany. There was East Prussia and Germany. They wanted to connect those two parts together and unify Germany. The Non-Aggression Pact, certainly the Nazis and the Soviets signing this, makes the world wonder how these two individuals who hate each other decide that they will not go to war. Hitler was trying to avoid a two-front war, so if he didn't have to fight the Russians, he could turn his attention to the French and to the British. Both countries agreed to divide up Poland secretly before they invaded it. And with the Blitzkrieg, this lightning war, Poland comes to its end. And then British and the French will get into the war. Again, America stays neutral. The Neutrality Act in 1939. The British and the French needed U.S. planes. FDR knows that the war is coming to America. He wants to side with the British and the French. So this act was passed to modify those neutrality acts that had been passed from 35, 36, and 37. And so it says we will sell weapons to European democracies on a cash and carry basis. So they could buy weapons from the United States. American ships and citizens could not enter the war zone. FDR delivers his Arsenal Democracy speech, which says that we are going to help the democratic countries against the fascist countries of the world. The U.S. could not stay neutral. It had to take a side. We were going to become the great warehouse of the Allies. And so the Neutrality Act moves us a little bit closer to war. And we'll stop right there.